We have a pretty decent Raw in LA and 3, count 'em, wrestling deaths to discuss this week. All that and much more here in episode 412. What is up? Good mic work, back at you. So remember last week at the end of my commentary, I said, well, I'm going to talk to you guys at my normal time next week, unless somebody dies or something like that. And 3 fucking wrestlers died over the weekend. Unbelievable. So I figured I would be inconsistent again this week. I know normally I come up here late Wednesdays, early Thursdays discussing Raw and Smackdown in kind of like a joint review. But due to the fact that we suffered a few wrestling deaths this week and Raw just ended and I have some time here, why don't I do what I did last week and come up and talk about Raw, and then I'll come back at you later this week and discuss Smackdown, because tomorrow night on Smackdown, of course, we have a big number 1 contenders battle royal that's going to determine probably the main event of WrestleMania and whether or not the Bray Wyatt-Randy Orton match is going to be a 3-way or not, potentially with Luke Harper or somebody else. So we've got a lot to talk about on the Smackdown side of things, but instead of making everybody wait for my comments, and I actually felt really bad about not getting up here and talking about George the Animal Steele, Ivan Koloff, and Nicole Bass over the weekend because I was just too busy. So I've allotted some time at the end of this commentary. Once we're done talking about Raw, I'm going to discuss all 3 of those individuals and the mark they left on the wrestling business. So sit back and relax and enjoy a couple of commentaries from me this week. As always, please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not yet already. Visit my website, GoodMicWorkCommentaries.com. Follow me on Twitter at GoodMicWork. Like my Facebook page, and please, please, please like this video. I'm very into likes lately, so if you guys can hook me up with the likes, I would definitely appreciate it. Please share the video and always comment in the comment section below and give me any opinions you want about WWE or anything I talk about in this commentary. We're going to start with Raw first before I get into George, Ivan, and Nicole. This was a pretty decent show again. I mean, it wasn't great, just like a lot of Raws. It's not perfect. It's 3 hours. It's boring sometimes. But for the most part, I don't think this was a bad Raw. And I would have to say now, I guess at least the last 3 or 4 weeks, Raw has been decent. It seems like it's been getting more positive reviews than negative. And tonight was no different. And we had what could have potentially been a stinker of a main event that turned out to be actually pretty decent. So normally when I talk about Raw and Smackdown, I kind of bounce around. Why don't we go somewhat in order this time? So Raw opened, of course, with a recap of what took place last week between Chris Jericho and Kevin Owens, and the whole Festival of Friendship segment and the big turning of Kevin Owens on Chris Jericho and the whole deal. I went back and watched that segment again late last week and was even more appreciative of it the second time. It was just such a great combination of awesome and sadness all at the same time, and it's something that's rare these days to see. And what was cool about Raw tonight is that Kevin Owens opened up the show sitting down in a chair in the ring, completely dark, wearing a suit. Seems like he kind of underwent an attitude change a little bit, kind of like what I mentioned last week, that he's probably going to be more like NXT Kevin Owens, maybe even like ROH Kevin Steen, instead of kind of the jokester that he's been with Chris Jericho, although he's been putting on some pretty damn good matches. I mean, despite all the goofy stuff he's been doing with Jericho, I mean, his match with Roman Reigns at the Royal Rumble was fantastic, and he had a couple of wars defending the title throughout the fall, and the way he won the belt was fucking great. So Kevin Owens can still be Kevin Owens when he wants to be, but his association with Chris Jericho, I think, was maybe hurting his character a little bit, even though we all loved it as fans and were happy for him and Jericho that they were getting the opportunity to work together in this extremely entertaining way. It did kind of take away a little bit from the tough guy Kevin Owens image, and that seemed to kind of come back tonight. And now it makes a much more serious opponent for Goldberg. I've been talking about how Goldberg should probably win the title at Fast Lane. At least now they're putting a little bit of doubt in your mind, and I'm not completely sold or completely convinced on the idea yet. So even though I think Brock and Goldberg should be a title match, most likely will be a title match, I'm not positive. So you guys are welcome to throw out any scenarios at me that you might think that they could do as an alternative to where Owens can leave the match as champion, but Goldberg can still stay just as strong as ever. Owens spent the majority of his promo talking about Goldberg and talking about how he's not afraid of him and he thinks he can beat him. He has a strategy. He knows exactly what to do. The longer a Goldberg match goes, the more it benefits his opponent. He even threw out some sort of line like he knows how to play the game, and we know his association with Triple Triple H. You know, Triple H helped him win the title, and Triple H seemingly is the one that convinced Owens to do what he did to Jericho last week. At least that's the theory. So it's not out of the question that Triple H plays a role in this thing. You know, the Seth Rollins shit is up in the air. They're claiming now that he is going to miss his second straight WrestleMania, but he's also booked for Raw next week to talk about it. So maybe he comes out and swerves us all and says that he's going to be good to go, or maybe he announces that he truly is going to be out. And if that's the case, that means it frees up Triple H to do other shit with Samoa Joe, Kevin Owens, maybe interject himself in this Goldberg situation or something like that. So the door is wide open for tons of options, and they've got a lot of different ways they can go, and I guess we'll know more after next week. So next week, hopefully, I will be up here at my normal time to talk about Raw and SmackDown, and I will also include full Fast Lane pay-per-view predictions in that commentary as well. So check that out next week, which will be probably episode 414. But another thing I liked about Kevin Owens' promo is that he spent the whole time talking about Goldberg and really didn't mention Jericho at all until the very end. And then finally he brings up Jericho, and as soon as he says his name, he just drops the mic and leaves. I like it. He offered no explanation whatsoever, made the fans wait through his long promo on Goldberg to get to the Jericho stuff, and then didn't say a word and walked away. It was awesome. And later on, he's actually leaving the building right after that, and Mick Foley stops him and says, "Where are you going? You got a match tonight against Sami Zayn." So we were going to get Sami Zayn and Owens later on. Next up, we had kind of a baffling number one contender tag team title match between Enzo and Cass and Cesaro and Sheamus. I thought for sure that Cesaro and Sheamus would get the victory here. I'm still not ready for that tag team to disband. I know we're getting close to WrestleMania. I was thinking at first that these guys would eventually face each other at WrestleMania in some culmination to this big thing, but now I'm thinking they might stick together as a team, and I'm fine with that because the longer they stay together as a team, the longer we don't have to worry about Sheamus having a singles run. And I actually like them as a tag team. I like their entrance. I like their vibe. They've grown on me a lot since they got together. They're getting along a lot better now, becoming more of a cohesive unit, and I'm not ready for the tag team to break up yet. And I thought for sure they would easily defeat Enzo and Cass. Nothing against Cass, he's awesome, but the Enzo and Cass team has just never really been one of my favorites because I think Enzo is not really credible. To me, he just seems more of a guy that is better in a manager role, maybe a commentator role. He's extremely entertaining. He can wrestle sometimes, but I think for the most part, he needs to be more of a personality than an actual worker because it seems like it's just a one-man team out there. And so whenever they win, I feel like it's kind of an upset because Enzo, I feel, is a weak link, and he was getting his ass kicked out there. I mean, that one uppercut that Cesaro gave him almost took his head off. After the match, after Enzo and Cass actually won this match, Cass got the pin, of course, because Cass is the badass of the team. Enzo's on the outside of the ring cutting another promo about how they won, and Sheamus hits him with the most vicious brogue kick I've ever seen. It was awesome. And Enzo just takes a beating in there. I swear, this guy's gonna die in the ring. Remember that one pay-per-view last year when they first came in, when he got concussed and taken to the hospital and stuff? So he just takes some hellacious bumps and hellacious ass kickings, not to mention what Rusev did to him in that hotel room that one time. So what I envision happening here is that maybe Enzo and Cass actually take the belts from Gallows and Anderson at Fastlane, because I think eventually this team has got to go their separate ways. WWE, we've all been hearing that they love Big Cass. They probably have big plans for him. I like Cass as well. He kind of has a 7-foot-tall Edge thing going on. He kind of reminds me of Edge a little bit, and I think if you spice up his character a little bit, give him some more personality, get him away from that funny, cliched promo shit that he does with Enzo, maybe make him a little bit more rock and roll or something like that, maybe a little bit more appealing. I think the guy can be great. He's got a ton of charisma, he's very good on the mic, and I think Cass has a ton of potential, but he eventually has to break away from Enzo. So maybe what the plan here is, since Enzo and Cass won what I consider to be an upset, maybe the WWE is going to put the belts on them at Fastlane, and maybe they're going to put them on them for 1 month. Maybe Enzo and Cass beats Gallows and Anderson. They go into WrestleMania for maybe like a 3-way, possibly even a fatal 4-way against a bunch of teams on Raw, and they drop the belts back to Cesaro and Sheamus at WrestleMania, which causes Cass to snap and beat the ever-loving shit out of Enzo and turn heel at WrestleMania. If they did that, what better way to launch Cass than that? It's a hell of a lot more creative than having him win the Andre the Giant Battle Royal. So that's my plan, or that's what I'm hoping they're doing with the tag team situation. I think Cesaro and Sheamus need to eventually win the belts back whether it's a one-on-one match at WrestleMania for the tag belts or whether it's a 3 or 4 team type of deal. I think Cesaro and Sheamus should regain the belts at WrestleMania. And I just think that would be such a perfect time to turn Cass if they did it at WrestleMania, because everybody will remember it. It's also possible that something like that could be held off until the Monday Night Raw after WrestleMania, because you know they're going to want to have Big Angle's break on that show as well. But regardless of when they do it, I think it just needs to happen very soon before this shtick gets too old, if it has not yet already. We also saw Brian Kendrick have a match with Akira Tazawa, which never even got underway. Kendrick just beat the hell out of him before the match even started. I guess he was trying to offer his services to be Tazawa's mentor or something like that. Tazawa wanted nothing to do with him, and Kendrick decided to give him a beatdown to teach him some respect or something like that. So at least they're trying some storylines with these cruiserweight guys. I'll give them that. In another match that almost scared the hell out of me, they did a rematch from last week. You know, we already dodged one bullet with Roman Reigns in the club last week, with Roman Reigns taking on the tag team fucking champions in a handicap match. And we all thought Roman Reigns was going to win and squash them both, but instead he won by disqualification, I believe. So they did the rematch this week, and I'm thinking to myself, fuck, are you kidding me? I breathed such a huge sigh of relief last week, and now WWE is just going to redo the match again, only to disappoint us even worse than we could have imagined, because now they're going to have these guys lose to Roman a second week in a row, and this time probably cleanly. But guess what? He didn't. What has Roman Reigns done this year? Let me ask you that. Now, granted, he could be gearing up for a big victory over The Undertaker at WrestleMania, but so far this year, he has not been booked like a superhero. He has not been booked like John Cena. He's been losing more than he's been winning. He lost at the Royal Rumble twice. He lost to Samoa Joe. He lost tonight. He might have even lost here or there a time or two on Raw via DQ or something like that in the last few weeks. So it's not like he's going out there and killing everybody. And I thought for sure that he was. I thought he was going to annihilate and completely bury Gallows and Anderson, but luckily they didn't. Gallows and Anderson still don't look that strong, but at least it wasn't a complete beatdown. Roman got DQ'd this time. He was the one that actually lost this match. I think he used the chair, right? And then after the match, he just beats the hell out of both guys with the chair. And somebody mentioned me on Twitter a really interesting point. They said, nothing says babyface quite like a guy in a Kevlar vest beating the hell out of two shirtless guys with a steel chair. Exactly. It's so effed up. But at least Roman Reigns didn't squash these guys. At least it wasn't a super Roman type of situation where the internet freaks out or whatever. Roman went out there. He had his handicap match. He lost. That was the end of it. I think we can let it go. It still remains to be seen what's going to happen between Roman and The Undertaker between now and WrestleMania, if that is still the match they're going to go with. Roman has got the big match with Strowman at Fast Lane. You would have to think that that's the perfect place for The Undertaker to make his challenge, because that can also give Braun Strowman a big victory over Roman Reigns while not harming Roman Reigns at all, because he's about to go into Mania and defeat an icon. So it's kind of a win-win situation. That's what I'm guessing is going to happen, but I guess it is still up in the air at this point. The New Day came out next, and this was a really stupid segment. It was last week, too. The one big news that came out of this is that the New Day has been announced to be the hosts of WrestleMania 33. Now, this ties into what I was going to talk about. The New Day has kind of been floundering lately. They've been coming out doing these silly segments like they always do, but they're not really locked in any concrete feuds. They were doing shit with the Shining Stars. Now they're doing this crap with Jinder Mahal and Rusev, and there's a fucking ice cream recipe involved or something like that, and there's plans to it on an iPad, and Lana stole it because she's Russian. Great line, by the way, by Big E. Lance Storm tweeted that he was waiting for a moose and squirrel run-in, and that's the first thing I thought of, too. So the whole thing was just silly and kind of dumb, and it's what we've been seeing from the New Day every week. They're not doing anything meaningful. They're just out there to do their little entertaining segment, entertaining part of the show, to give the fans a chuckle and all of that. And they're great, don't get me wrong, but I miss the days when the New Day were tag team champions in meaningful feuds. Now they're just doing bullshit every week. And it looks like the WWE is at a loss of what to do with these guys as well, because they're not ready to break them up yet, but at the same time, they're not putting them back in a title feud at this point. So instead, they're going to host WrestleMania. I guess they're going to be the ones to open the show. They're probably going to have a crazy entrance and a crazy segment. I can almost guarantee you that The Rock will show up to be a part of that. Maybe even Hulk Hogan. You know, we've been hearing rumors about Hulk Hogan possibly mending fences with the WWE and coming back in. And since Hogan was kind of let go because of racially insensitive comments, comments, if he came out there and had a segment with 3 black guys, I think that could help. And if the New Day kind of embraced Hogan in and, they showed him a lot of love, I think it could really help the fans that are still a little iffy about the guy maybe forgive him. And yes, he does some extremely questionable things. He's a habitual liar. He's got some personal issues. Nobody's perfect. But at the end of the day, despite what he said, even though I find racism disgusting, despite what Hogan said, he's not truly a racist, I don't believe. I just think he says some stupid shit. So if he came out there at WrestleMania and did a segment with the New Day, that could almost be WWE helping him apologize to the fans, especially with the New Day showing him so much love and making the whole thing entertaining and lighthearted and maybe not so serious, because the New Day is all about fun, right? And positivity. And maybe they can turn this whole thing with Hulk Hogan into a positive, and he can be welcomed back into the WWE family and universe. So I say either Hogan comes out or The Rock comes out and does something with the New Day at WrestleMania. It seems almost guaranteed at this point. But by the way, they did defeat Jinder Mahal and Rusev, and poor Rusev, right? He's another guy that I'm worried that if they do bring Hogan back in, they might do something with Rusev. Maybe not. I don't think Hogan's back could handle a camel clutch, so they couldn't do a repeat of him winning the title from the Iron Sheik. I don't think Hulk would be able to do it physically. But I'm worried that Rusev might eat a few punches and a big boot, and potentially even a leg drop if we're that unlucky at WrestleMania. Hopefully not. If we see Hulk, hopefully he's just out there with the New Day having fun, or just does some sort of backstage segment where he returns and gives us all a thrill. But anyway, we'll discuss all that as we get closer to WrestleMania. We also had another Cruiserweight segment. This was the contract signing between Jack Gallagher and Neville, and I love this because Jack Gallagher is out there. He's very entertaining. He's in the ring first. He's got tea and biscuits. They look like cookies, but I think in the UK they're called biscuits. I'm from the South. I have a completely different idea of what a biscuit is, but it was a pretty funny little setup there that Gallagher had, and I can't even look at tea without thinking of Chris Jericho taking a piss in it. When I saw the little tea setup there, it made me think of William Regal when he was the commissioner, and Jericho taking a leak in his tea and then him drinking it and all that stuff. So Jack Gallagher reminds me of Regal a little bit, and then he is out there ready to sign his contract. They introduce Neville. Neville comes right down to the ring, walks right into the ring, grabs the pen, doesn't say a word, signs the contract immediately, throws the pen down, and walks away and leaves. I wish it would have ended like that. I knew it couldn't end like that. I knew they had to do some more interaction, but I love that fucking attitude about Neville. He does not give a shit. He's out there to kick some ass, and that's it. Jack does wind up coaxing him back in the ring. The two start brawling. Gallagher gets the best of him. I think hits him with that vicious headbutt. I can only imagine what happens if you botch that. I mean, that's a really believable looking headbutt, and if you're off just by a couple of inches and you really crack heads, you could seriously hurt yourself. But I like Gallagher's style. It's very different. It's innovative. It's a little bit of a form of cruiserweight wrestling that I am not that familiar with. I have not seen too many guys that do what Gentleman Jack does. So I think the match and the feud with Neville is actually pretty intriguing. I mean, it's one of the most interesting feuds that I've seen them have so far for the cruiserweight title. I was never really into the Kendrick and TJ Perkins stuff, although I appreciated Kendrick's work during that. It was something that really wasn't interesting me that much. It wasn't until Neville came around and returned as a heel that I started to say, okay, there's some parts now of the cruiserweight division that's actually entertaining, and now with the belt on him and his current feud with Gallagher, he's doing the best job so far of anybody who's held that cruiserweight title. We had Nia Jax destroying a jobber that kind of looked like Christina Aguilera in 1999, and then she cut a promo in the ring after saying that she wants a title shot against Bayley. So that's probably going to be the title match for WrestleMania. I still think they're going to do multiple women. Most likely it'll probably be a four-way if you look at the way everything's going right now. I mean, hell, it only seems like there is 4 women on the Raw roster anyway, so it's probably going to be Sasha, Nia, Bayley, Charlotte, and some sort of a 4-way deal at WrestleMania most likely. We then had a Bayley promo where she came out for the first time since winning the belt. Started out really bad, really sappy, really awful, as she had to do her boyhood dream shtick and her crying about calling her dad when she won the belt and how much she wanted to be a WWE superstar and how it was her dream and all this stuff. We hear this shit all the time, so it was a little bit boring. I mean, we're all happy for Bayley. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm very happy for Bayley. You have to put yourself in her shoes. Most of us watch wrestling because we're fans. I cover wrestling because I'm still a fan to this day. If I didn't enjoy wrestling, I wouldn't be doing this. So there was a time when I envisioned myself being a big-time wrestling star as well. So if you ever get to that point, it's got to be a pretty good feeling to know that, wow, I dreamed of this as a kid. I went to shows. I met wrestlers. I used to admire these people, and now I am holding the same title belts that they are. You can't help but feel good for somebody like that. So I'm not really shitting on Bayley. It's just the promo is just not interesting. I mean, Bayley is just so positive and innocent and almost a naiveness to her that is just, it's unattractive to me. I like it when she turns it up. I like it when she gets mad. She had a good match with Charlotte last week. I liked when she won the belt. I mean, a lot of people were complaining about it. It's this hot potato bullshit with the belt, but I still appreciated the match, but I was not appreciating the promo by Bayley. Luckily, Stephanie came out there. Normally, I don't say luckily Stephanie came out there, but for once I was actually happy to see her because she is the exact polar opposite of Bayley. You cannot get any different than Bayley than Stephanie McMahon. They are the exact opposites of each other. So I thought it would make a pretty good segment provided Stephanie didn't bury her or slap her or demean her or degrade her or anything like that like she has done to some women in the past. So I was somewhat nervous, but at the same time optimistic that it would make for some pretty good TV with these two drastically different characters clashing. And of course, she says that because of the way Bayley won the belt last week, that she also feels that she should relinquish the title. Charlotte has not shut the fuck up about it on Twitter, about how she's coming to Raw and Bayley better give her belt back and all of that because she didn't win it in a legit manner. And what was confusing about this is that Stephanie was in agreement with that and was saying, yes, Bayley, you should relinquish the belt. You need to do it. But she wasn't making her do it. Stephanie's the boss. If she wants to strip Bayley of the title, she can. So I don't understand why she was giving Bayley a choice. But Bayley, I like what she did here. She took a page from Hulk Hogan. This entire segment reminded me of when Hulk Hogan had to decide whether or not to sell the WWE title belt to the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. When the $1 Million Man first came into the WWE late 87, they started filming all these vignettes where he was telling everybody that he's going to buy the WWE World title. He's going to become the new champion by purchasing the belt, and he's going to make Hulk Hogan such a big offer that he will have no choice but to accept it. And Hogan went a couple of weeks to decide, and then he came out to cut his big promo. I even remember, I think it was with Craig DeGeorge, and he sat there, he even took the belt off and looked at it and said, you know, I think about what this money could do for my family, and he's really wrestling with the decision, and then finally he goes, hell no, and screams at the end and reveals that he never had any intention of giving the belt up to begin with, and Bayley did the exact same thing. So that was definitely something that put a smile on my face because it reminded me of a angle from my childhood. And for a nostalgic guy like me, that's something I'm never going to complain about. This whole thing did wind up leading to a match between Charlotte and Sasha Banks. Sasha said that she's good to go and she's 100% from her injury and she's ready to wrestle again, and challenges Charlotte right there to a match on Monday Night Raw, which Stephanie McMahon agrees to and makes for right there at that very moment. I think they go to commercial, come back, and have the match, and Sasha picks up the victory. Celebrates with Bayley and the whole thing, and we'll have to see if Charlotte remains dominant at Fast Lane. She did invoke her rematch clause, by the way, when she was out there talking, and she's going to get the rematch with Bayley at Fastlane, and we know how dominant Charlotte is on pay-per-view, so something has got to give here. It kind of looks like Charlotte's going to wind up going into WrestleMania as champion, which means the belt is going to change hands yet again. To me, it almost seems like WWE is just trying to fast-track a legacy to this belt. I mean, that Divas title was in existence for so long. They finally got rid of it last year and started making the women's division respectable again, and maybe they're trying to give a whole bunch of people a title run just to give that belt some lineage before they go into the next generation of women or something. I don't know. I know it gets annoying when it changes hands a lot, but you also have to remember that we haven't been used to seeing great women's wrestling like this. And on top of that, the women's divisions are pretty thin now that they've separated the brands. You know, together it's a pretty solid women's division, but the rosters are pretty thin on Smackdown and Raw, so you can only do so much, so title changes kind of spice things up a little bit. So I know there's some of us that don't like frequent title changes, but yeah, the match at Fastlane should be interesting. I would think that whenever Charlotte's long-running pay-per-view winning streak comes to an end, it will not end at a pay-per-view like Fastlane. I think if it ends, it'll end at WrestleMania or SummerSlam or something like that. Next up, we had the Sami Zayn versus Kevin Owens match, which was sabotaged by Samoa Joe. Sami Zayn is making his entrance, and Joe attacks him from behind. Again, wearing the business casual suit, absolutely beats the holy hell out of Sami Zayn, and then throws him back in the ring, and for some reason, the referees start the match. I mean, this was an annihilation. This was a beatdown. The referees are running in there with towels and gloves if somebody gets a little cut on their head, and here Sami Zayn gets almost killed, and they're going to let him wrestle the match just because he says he wants to? You mean to tell me after that beating, he doesn't have a kayfabe concussion or something like that? Give me a fucking break. So they let Sami compete in the match, but he doesn't even last, maybe a minute? Kevin Owens completely annihilates him and wins the match. I love the beatdown. I love the quick work that Owens made of Sami Zayn and his new attitude that he's displaying and the temporary alliance here between Samoa Joe and Kevin Owens. You talk about an unstoppable team. Maybe one day they can form the big two-man power trip recreation in the future if they ever get together. Which brings us now to our main event. They actually had Braun Strowman and Big Show main event this thing, and I was not sure that this match was going to be any good. But it was. For two big beefy guys like this match was not horrible. And I think the WWE is going to do big things with Braun Strowman in the future, because the fact that he was able to go out there with a Big Show and not have a slow, boring match where the fans are drooling on themselves and falling asleep is a pretty good sign that this big guy can actually go. The only thing that sucked was the finish. They completely botched it, but it's okay. Big Show's 500 pounds. I can easily forgive Braun Strowman for that, but I think they were doing the deal where Big Show was going to do almost like a Vader bomb, and Braun Strowman was supposed to catch him in power slam position and plant him into the mat and get the pin. Strowman tried to lift up Big Show, but he just couldn't do it. He was almost falling over and gave him a real kind of half-ass power slam. Luckily, Big Show kicked out, and they tried to do the whole thing again, but even the second power slam wasn't that great. But still, the fans didn't seem to care. They maybe gave the guys a little bit of shit, but not much. I mean, I thought the two recovered in a decent way for the match. Still wasn't the greatest finish, but the match leading up to that was pretty good, and I think the fans were into it. Even This Is Awesome chants. Who would fucking think a match like this with two behemoths, the fans would be chanting This Is Awesome, but they were. And they wouldn't shut the hell up all night about how they were going to reinforce the ring. They even sent a whole bunch of guys out there with wrenches and hammers to pretend that they were tightening everything up for these two big monsters. So I was kind of thinking that they were going to break the ring again. And they teased it when Show had Strowman up for the superplex. You thought maybe if they fall back, that ring is going to collapse. And we knew we hadn't seen the last of Roman Reigns because he wanted Strowman right from the beginning. The reason he was booked in that handicap match with the club in the first place was because he demanded Strowman, but he was already booked in a match with Big Show, so Foley put him in there with the club. So Reigns comes out there and starts attacking Braun Strowman, and Strowman fucking fights him off. I mean, Jesus, you talk about domination. At least for right now, I don't think the fans can really complain that bad about Roman Reigns because he has not been looking strong every week. He's been losing a lot, and he's been getting his ass kicked a lot. And I should backtrack a minute because I never did mention the Paul Heyman and Brock Lesnar promo that I think came right before the main event at some point. This was all done backstage, and Brock Lesnar was legit there at the Staples Center, but for some reason they decided to do a backstage deal. Michael Cole even left the commentary table to go back and do the interview. I'm still thinking they must have taped it earlier on in the day, and Brock has already gone home. Otherwise, why would they have him in the backstage environment if he's at the show? It seems like a bad night to burn one of his appearances. I mean, those are precious. You could have done the backstage interview at any time. You could have pre-taped that anytime you wanted. So I was surprised that Brock was actually there, and this is the segment they did with him, but it was good because it was different. And what I liked is that Paul Heyman cut the promo in the background, and you had Brock getting really, really close to the camera, sitting backwards in a chair and staring the camera right in the face. He was just looking right at you. And it was just good stuff because Paul Heyman just did his Paul Heyman type of promo, talked up Brock Lesnar, talked about the big feud between Brock and Goldberg and how Brock Lesnar has no reason to interfere in this match. He should want Goldberg to be the champion because that gives him something to take away from him. So Paul Heyman kind of reiterated that and said that Brock Lesnar is ready for a title match at WrestleMania. So all in all, it was a good segment. It was different and it was dramatic because Heyman is such a good promo cutter. And then when you add Brock's camera positioning and the way he was just kind of staring at all of us, I thought it made for a really good segment and a much better backstage segment than I was thinking it would be. So all in all, it was a pretty good Raw. We're 2 weeks away now from Fast Lane and things are gearing up for WrestleMania. So we've got a lot to talk about in the next few weeks. So give me all your ideas and your thoughts for the Raw side of things, what they're going to do at Fast Lane, who the champion is going to be going into WrestleMania, what you see them doing with Chris Jericho and Kevin Owens. Jericho's another guy that could have a big impact in that Goldberg and Kevin Owens match at Fast Lane. So there's lots of different scenarios here, and it should be fun to speculate on it. Just a couple of other notes on Raw. They did acknowledge the passing of George the Animal Steele in the beginning of the show, ran a nice video package in tribute to him in the middle of the show, and then did a small just screenshot of an RIP picture for Ivan Koloff as well later on that was on screen for maybe 5 seconds or something. So I'll talk about those two guys in a minute, but they did at least acknowledge both of their passings on Monday Night Raw. George Steele, I know, has always been in good graces with the WWE, but Ivan Koloff, maybe not so much, and I'll talk more about that here in a little bit. And we also had our newest inductee announced for this year's Hall of Fame, and it is, of course, the guy that was rumored right from the beginning, Diamond Dallas Page. Could not be happier for him. I absolutely fucking love Diamond Dallas Page. I have more respect for him than almost anybody in the wrestling business because of his attitude, how hard he's worked, and the fucking lives he's saved. What he has done for Jake the Snake Roberts and Scott Hall, all of us as wrestling fans owe this man a huge thank you for for saving these two guys' lives. He's about to bring Vader into his house too. I think he's going to start working with Vader. Vader's problems are much different. He's got heart problems. He's even been tweeting out some really sketchy, cryptic type of shit, like he really thinks his time is limited and his days are numbered. Hopefully, Diamond Dallas Page can help turn things around for him. But despite all of that, he's still going into the Hall of Fame for his wrestling career. I loved him in WCW. I mean, he was not really over in the early 90s. It wasn't until Hall and Nash got there and the NWO storyline, and he became such a huge babyface in WCW. And I'll never forget when everybody was joining the NWO, and 1 week on Nitro, it looked like Diamond Dallas Page was going to join the NWO too, because he has history with Scott Hall dating back to his Diamond Stud days, and of course Eric Bischoff, their neighbors and friends, and everybody thought that Diamond Dallas Page was going to join the NWO, and then he swerved everybody and nailed, I think, Scott Hall with a diamond cutter. One of the biggest crowd pops I can ever remember. Even the Off the Rope Show podcast, I saw on Twitter tonight that they referenced that moment as well, and it made me think of it and how awesome it was. I watched that live on Nitro that night. So congratulations to Diamond Dallas Page, one of the better representations of the wrestling business. This guy is absolutely awesome. A true shining star, a true bright spot in a business that is filled with a lot of black eyes and a lot of black holes and a lot of tragedy. So very happy for Diamond Dallas Page. Congratulations, long overdue, and I love you, man. The last thing I'm going to mention about Raw is apparently The Rock was also there. He's filming that movie that's kind of based on Page's life, I think, and they were filming some stuff at the Staples Center that day, and apparently him and Vince McMahon came out before the show and did some sort of a segment in the ring. And I haven't seen anything or any pictures or anything. I only read something about Vince maybe firing The Rock, and they did a whole segment there. I fully expect The Rock to be at WrestleMania. Hopefully he will be. Probably not going to wrestle or anything like that, but we might see him come out there and fucking light his name on fire again or something like that. Who knows? And finally, of course, before I sign off here, I do want to acknowledge the latest batch of wrestling deaths that we suffered over the weekend. 3 pretty big ones here. And when you take a look at 2017 already, we're only 7 or 8 weeks into this year, and we've already lost Jimmy Superfly Snuka, Timothy Smith, Chavo Guerrero Sr. last week, and now 3 more over the weekend. And like I said earlier, I have got to stop ending my commentaries with, okay, I'll see you next week unless somebody dies. And I really wanted to get up here and do a separate video for all 3 of these individuals and paying tribute to them, but because of the weekend I was having, I wasn't able to do it, so I was going to have to lump them in to this big commentary here. But still, I mean, these are pretty significant deaths here. I think Nicole Bass was the first one to pass. Her death was strange because there was some discrepancies at first. They announced that she had passed away, and then it turned out that she had not technically passed away. They were going to take her off life support and had not yet done so, and the information was leaked. I do believe she has officially passed away now. And her contributions to the business were not as big as the next 2 gentlemen I'm going to talk about, but she still made her mark. And I still have a lot of memories of her. As a matter of fact, I have something in common with all 3 of these people. I was at WrestleMania 15. I was in attendance the night that Nicole Bass debuted in the WWE as Sable's bodyguard. And prior to that, she was in ECW, I believe, with Justin Credible's stable, I think, for a little while. And I remember her from the Howard Stern show. He used to bring her on in that big parade of freaks that he had, that black guy Beetlejuice and Hank the Dwarf and a couple other guys. And I also remember her cameo in Private Parts, one of my favorite movies ever. So Nicole Bass definitely made her mark, and from what I've heard, everybody thought she was just a great person. Everybody was showing her a ton of love on social media, especially the ECW guys. I know I saw Lance Storm say something. Rob Van Dam posted a picture, I believe, Tommy Dreamer, maybe some others. So she was really well liked and seemed like a really nice lady, and everybody that she ever worked with has had positive things to say about her. So very sad. She was only 51, I believe. I don't know what her personal demons were. I don't know what her issues or health problems were, or why even she passed away at the young age that she did, but it's definitely sad and definitely a tragedy and definitely too soon. So my thoughts and condolences definitely go out to her, friends, and family. The next 2 guys are a little bit more legendary in the wrestling business. George the Animal Steele passed away late last week, and this one really saddened me. I wanted to get up here so bad, like I said, to make a video about him because my memories of George go so far back. I mean, I remember him when he was a heel. One of my favorite memories of him ever was turning babyface on Saturday night's main event. It was either the first or second episode. I can't remember. I think the main events are on the network. Are they? Pretty sure they are, so I'm sure you can look it up. Check out one of those early Saturday night's main events. You'll see the match I was talking about. It was a 6-man. George was teaming up with Sheik and Volkov, and of course Blassie was out there with the 3 of those guys, and they were taking on Mike Rotundo, Barry Windham, and I think Ricky Steamboat. It might have been Tito Santana, but I'm pretty sure it was Ricky Steamboat in a six-man tag, and I remember during the match, Sheik and Volkov refused to tag in to George. They jumped down off the apron, and I think Rotundo or Wyndham ended up rolling up George and pinning him, and then Sheik and Volkov attacked Steele after the match, and I think the babyfaces came in and saved George. I think either that or he fought him off, I can't remember, but what I liked about the end is that he's sitting there in the ring by himself, and Captain Lou Albano, who of course was the manager of Wyndham and Rotundo and who managed George Steele prior in his career when they were both heels, kind of came in the ring and consoled George Steele a little bit, and I remember liking to see the two of them hook back up now as babyfaces. So that was always one of my biggest memories of George Steele. He had great feuds with guys like Bruno Sammartino when he was a heel in the 70s. I think he even got a start in the late 60s and worked for Vince Sr. and then continued to work for Vince McMahon Jr. through the 80s there. Wrestled under a mask too when he first started because he was a school teacher. And I think he went to high school in Warren, Michigan. I know he was born in Detroit, which is the thing that I have in common with him, like I mentioned. We're both from the same area. I remember as a kid, George Steele would go to a lot of the Detroit Tiger games all the time. And I think to this day, I still have some distant cousins in the Warren, Michigan area, so I wouldn't be surprised at all if some of them had met or known George Steele at some point in his life. This guy had a pretty amazing career, and his character, that animal character in the WWE, was equally as entertaining, I think, as a heel and a babyface, and in completely different ways. He was one of those guys that went from being that vicious, scary heel to actually being a fun-loving babyface. There's not been too many guys that have been able to pull that off, and George did both equally well. Even after he was done being a heel and turned babyface, he had that great feud with Macho Man Randy Savage for the Intercontinental title where he was obsessed with Elizabeth. And I have really fond memories of that feud that spanned from maybe late 85 all the way until 87. I mean, shit, George the Animal Steele helped Ricky Steamboat win the Intercontinental title at WrestleMania 3, another show that I was at, in the Pontiac Silverdome in front of 90,000 people. So George Steele had a long run there with Randy Savage, and then later on in his career near the end in the late 80s there, he became more, I don't want to say a joke, but he wasn't taken that seriously. He had the green tongue thing happening. He had that doll, that mine doll or animal or whatever the hell it was that he carried around. And he was even more of a stumbling, bumbling, confused animal than he was before. And that was all Vince's creation. I mean, Vince is the one that wanted him to talk the way he did. If you've ever heard George Steele in interviews, the guy knows how to speak. I imagine if he was allowed to cut a promo like a normal person, he would probably be halfway decent, but they were hell-bent on having him just be this ape out there, and it worked to a large degree. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer, and I dare say that he's one of those guys. Back in the 80s, there was a handful of guys that even people who weren't wrestling fans knew who they were. I've always said that Hulk Hogan and Randy Macho Man Savage were very recognizable, but so is Roddy Piper, so is Junkyard Dog, and so is George the Animal Steele, and maybe a few others from that time period. It's like everybody kind of knew who they were, even if you didn't necessarily watch wrestling. And that's one thing that George the Animal Steele had that very few guys in wrestling have. Everybody remembers that furry, hairy, disgusting back of his. And when you pair that with the bald head and the big kind of stocky frame, he just really looked like an animal. I mean, he would bite open the turnbuckles and rip all the padding out. He did that shit for years. As a matter of fact, that match I just mentioned, when he got beat up and turned on by Sheik and Volkov, after the whole thing was over, watch him. He runs right over to the turnbuckle pad and just starts biting into it, basically like he's a stressed out animal that doesn't know what to do, so he just starts biting shit. He did a really good job of making you wonder, what the hell is this guy like in real life? Can he get around? Can he walk? Can he drive a car? Is he allowed to pay for things? Is this guy allowed to buy a gun? Shit, he's half nuts. But I'm happy to say that I have a lot of positive and fond and fun memories of George the Animal Steele. Virtually every time I think of him in a match or something like that, it takes me back to a really pleasant time in my life. And while George wouldn't necessarily perhaps make GoodMicWork's top 20 favorite wrestlers ever list or anything like that, I still have the utmost respect for the guy, and I admire him, I admire his career, and I admire the mark that he left. Another guy who definitely made his mark on professional wrestling, to say the very least, was Ivan Koloff. Ivan Koloff, sadly, passed away. I was aware of his health because I know I've mentioned this before in previous commentaries, but I used to live in the same town as Ivan Koloff in North Carolina for many years. And it was a small town, and he was very accessible. I saw him all the time. Whenever the WWE would come into the Carolinas for a show, he would always go. I talk about all the time how I traveled and went to a lot of WWE shows during the Attitude Era, tons of Raws and tons of Smackdowns and pay-per-views, house shows, too many to count. And virtually every time that we drove to Greensboro or to Charlotte or to Raleigh, sometimes even down to South Carolina, we would always run into Ivan Koloff on the road. He would be driving to the show too, and Ivan had connections. You know, he could drive right into the back and get right through backstage, and he was welcome there every single time. And he would go to virtually all the shows whenever they were in the area there. And I know he'd be backstage hanging out and taking pictures and talking to the young guys and stuff. So he was a really, really well-liked and kind man. I mean, very approachable. He was not one of those guys ever that I saw in a bad mood, although I never met him when he was younger. But when he was retired and semi-retired like that, living in the Carolinas, he was the sweetest and most gentlest, kind-hearted guy you would ever see. Very religious. He ended up becoming born again or whatever it's called years ago, and he would travel and he would speak at churches a lot, I remember, in the area and stuff. So very religious man and very kind man. And religion, of course, like most of you know, is not something that I personally need in my life. But for Ivan, just to see the man that he became and what it did for him was very, very positive. And he was just beloved in the community. And he chose to live down there in small town North Carolina. And most of my memories, actually, of Ivan Koloff in the ring were from the Carolinas, mostly in the NWA, when he was a part of the Russians. And Nikita Koloff was in that group, and Crusher Khrushchev, and they feuded with the Road Warriors a lot. That's when I remember seeing Ivan on TV the most, but he's probably the most well-known for ending Bruno Sammartino's nearly decade-long WWF title reign. He won the belt, I think, in the early 70s, 1970, 1971, something like that. So Bruno had held the belt for 8 years, maybe a little bit more, and Ivan Koloff finally took the belt off of him in Madison Square Garden to an absolutely stunned audience. It was one of the most famous matches that has ever happened in WWE because of the crowd. I mean, Bruno owned Madison Square Garden. The fans were used to seeing him come in there and retain the title night after night after night after night for years in the WWE, and he would do it again a couple of years later and hold the belt for another 3 or 4 years or something like that. And Ivan was one of the first guys to hold that belt. I mean, Buddy Rogers was the first champion. Bruno beat him, and then Ivan beat him. So even though the title was about 10 years old, really only 3 guys had held it. Now, Ivan would go on to drop it just a few weeks later to Pedro Morales, so they basically used Ivan Koloff in a transitional champion's role, which they would do many times. They would even maybe arguably do it with superstar Billy Graham. He only held the belt for about 8 months or something like that after Backlund took it from him. The Iron Sheik is another good example of that. He only had the belt for a few weeks before Hogan beat him for it. And of course, in present day, as recent as this year, when John Cena won the WWE title at the Royal Rumble to hand it over to Bray Wyatt. So they used John Cena as a way to get the title belt from one heel to another heel, and it's a technique that's as old as the business is. But Ivan Koloff, transitional champion or not, he's still the guy that ended that enormously long run by Bruno Sammartino, and he's the guy that shocked New York City right to its foundation. Can you imagine the talk around the town that night after Bruno lost when nobody was expecting him to? I'm sure there were some very angry people that night, and the scene in bars later on was probably a sight to behold, that's for sure. So Ivan Koloff definitely left an incredibly detailed footprint on the wrestling business, a true icon, a true legend. And the fact that this guy is not in the WWE Hall of Fame is unbelievable and actually a little bit infuriating, to be honest, because with certain guys like this that are clearly worthy of this honor, I know sometimes you have to wait for the right year and all of that. I have no problem with doing it at the right time, but this is a guy that when they're getting older, get these guys in there so they can be there for this. Get them into the Hall of Fame so they can accept the award on their own behalf and talk about their career and to have the fans see them one last time and all that shit. So I hate it when guys go in a little bit too late and they've already passed on. Ivan Koloff is a guy that WWE has had multiple opportunities to put in, and for some reason they haven't. I don't even know the story behind that. I do think he was listed as maybe one of the defendants in that concussion lawsuit thing a couple of years ago, so anybody that's on that is probably shunned or blackballed from the Hall of Fame or whatever, but still, put the fucking guy in the Hall of Fame, Jesus. So anyway, rest in peace, Russian Bear. Ivan Koloff, one of the most entertaining wrestlers of all time and a very legendary career, especially with some of the title belts that he held and some of the men that he beat. So anyway, that's going to wrap it up for me tonight. Like I said, I only came up here because I felt really overdue on talking about George Steele and Ivan Koloff and Nicole Bass, and I didn't want to wait until Thursday to come up here and start talking about all that. Plus, we also have Smackdown to talk about, and it would have made the commentary very, very long. So I figured I'd break it up like I did last week, but hopefully my plan is next week to go back to normal late Wednesday, early Thursday. I'll be up here with a Raw review, a Smackdown review, and full Fast Lane pay-per-view prediction. So keep a lookout for that. I will catch you probably this Thursday for a short Smackdown video. I'll have a few comments up on that, maybe elaborate a little bit more on Raw and any other wrestling news that might be going around. If you want me to talk about anything specific that I might not have known about, wrestling news-wise, just put it up on my Twitter page. I'll take a look at it and maybe mention it on Thursday. So you guys take care, and I'll talk to you in just a couple of days. Until next time, peace.